generally, but often that'll come out of your pocket too, depending on the company. Sometimes I've had it come out of my pay. Sometimes there's just so much extra shit laying around. I just grab a couple pairs.
I just want to let you all know, the Friendship Center, the Native Friendship Center in Prince George, if you have like a job coming up, you call the Friendship Center and say, hey, look, I've got a job, I need equipment, and I don't have a fire resistant, blah, blah, blah. You go there, make an appointment, and they will literally buy you whatever.
I was told I could buy a job. We went away.
So you could go to Prince George and get, because that's what I'm going to do after this.
I wish I'd been here yesterday and you were doing that today. Right?
Go to Prince George Friendship Center, and they will supply you with, as long as you have a job and you tell them, okay, this is my employer, this is my blah, 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 your work day or whatever, they'll do it.
FR Apparel.
So
Fire resistant.
What's the best buy not fire retardants and FedEx?
Well, it'll tell you, I mean, I'll explain in a second. So this is Nomex as well, right? So that the Nomex clothing is what you want. It's called Nomex. So I'm wearing all Nomex right now and boots that are appropriate for the line. One of the cool things in wildland firefighting is if you're not steel-toed, it's one of the places that you can get away with it. And that's because in a lot of terrain you're in, steel-toed boots don't offer you the support you need. Yeah, so I know, like, I don't mind these on flat terrain and whatnot, but as soon as you start getting into deep canyons and roll it like hard country, that's when you start getting bloody heels, right? And that's your enemy. So if you feel a little heat in the back of your heels, get to that first aid tent and be like, get me the, what's that shit called? It's like a skin.
Yeah,
fake skin. Second skin, yeah. So I've had that where I felt it start getting hot on day 3, and I was like, oh no.
You can buy that yourself, and keep that in your own. Would it be good to keep your own personal? Sure,
but if you're on a fire keep your own personal, and if you're on a fire where there's a first aid truck, go to them and don't use your personal, so that you still have your personal, right?
Yeah, just in case.
And then make them earn their, $400 a day. They're getting to sit in the truck doing dick all, right? So these are Nomex pants. These are thick ones. I hate them on a hot fire because they're so thick you're gonna sweat real hard. I have a pair of really super thin ones. And this, of course, I'm gonna take it off too because it's warm in here. I also have a thin Nomex shirt that's way, it's 30. When you get into a Kamloops area fighting, I remember the one year I got deployed and there was fires going on here, and I got deployed to a Soyuz. No, not a Soyuz, but right near there, Karamias. And so here I am, I'm in Wells, and I wake up and there was some ash on my truck window from these fires. But there was dew because it's Wells. We still hit the dew point almost every night of the summer, and that's why we rarely have major fire activity up there. Get in the truck, drive for who knows how long, get down to a Soyuz, and we get there at 5 in the morning, sleep for a couple hours, get up. They didn't put us on the line that day because we were too tired. But I get up, and here I am now from Wells, British Columbia, and I'm in a Soyuz, and it's like 38 degrees, and it's desert, and they're talking about rattlesnakes, and to kick it all off, to top it off, the cherry on the top was that there was a whole battalion of Mexican firefighters, and they're all standing at attention, and I'm coming out of my tent, and I'm first thing in the morning, I'm like, where in the hell am I? Like, and it's like I know so much about the caribou in so many ways: weather, climate, land, forest, fire behavior. To just be sent to Karamias, it was hot. We're going to talk a little bit about the S100 book, and not in great detail because this will be what you get taught. However, you're going to hear some of the things ahead of time, and you're going to get, for example, this is probably like an exam question you're going to have. Does anyone know what the fire triangle is?
Oxygen, fuel.
Yes. Oxygen, fuel, heat. There's a larger, for structural firefighting, that includes chemical, so there's extra, but your main one you need for wildland is your triangle, right? So you have fuel, heat, oxygen, right? So if you remove any of those 3 things, what's going to happen?
Fire will go.
Yeah. So
Too much of air will too.
So yeah, you got, there's that balance, right? So, you know, one of your main jobs in forest firefighting is removing the fuel, because you can't do much about the oxygen, and you're not going to do a whole lot about the heat, right? So one of your main tactics is to remove the fuel. So we'll get into that. And as you know too, because you've probably been in the woods a lot, in your forest you have your overstory, your canopy. So that's where your class 4, 5, and 6 fires are going to climb up to the top of those trees, right? So you have your canopy, then you have your understory. And what I noticed about fire behavior, just before I get any further on that, is if you take this book and put a match to it, how likely is it going to burn?
Not very likely.
So you see that when you're in an old growth forest, you'll come across trees that have been burnt many times and have resisted it, right? So a lot of what's problematic in BC and why we're having such fire behavior is because of the way we log. I mean, plus we got climate change and other factors, right? There's never just one reason for things, but largely you look at when these regen stands catch, the fire will go for a run, because you got 30-foot tall trees that are all brushy. It's climbing along the ground, climbs up, there's some broken branch hanging down, climbs up, and boom. And those fresh trees, the idea being that, like, you think that all these dead pines are your biggest enemy out in the fire line. However, I mean, they're gonna fall down more often, so they're an enemy, but they are so lacking in pitch and fuel and things like, because they're so dried out and dead, right? They're not gonna burn quite the same as when you have a forest of 25, 30-foot tall pines that are just loaded with sap and those green, and if it dries out, those green needles, boom, huge fire. So then the forest floor is, of course, where your type 1 and 2 fires are, and I'll explain what type 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fires are if you don't know in a second. But so that's what you call the Duff Layer, generally. The Duff is the organic compounds that are beneath your feet. That would be roots, decomposed stuff, all the stuff that makes up the mineral layer underneath you. And so much of the fire burns in this mineral layer. Often, like when you're in a cleanup crew especially, you're going to come to an area at 8 in the morning, it's completely dead, and doesn't seem like there's much happening. But then when the heat of the day gets on it, suddenly you'll start seeing areas of smoke coming out of pockets of the ground, right? And you got to dig them up and find them, because they'll live for a long, long time. I was mentioning earlier too, if you find good hot spots, make sure you have tin foil with you so you can wrap your sandwich and bury them in the hot spots, melt your cheese all up, and have a nice toasty lunch, right? And use those hot spots.
Very genius.
Yeah, well, the one time, I'll go off topic for a second, but this is a funny story, because you can imagine I'm with a crew of all natives, and we had these initial attack guys that made us do a whole bunch of work for them the day before, even though we had our section of the line completely clear. So our crew boss, who used to be initial attack, he was like, kind of mad at them for it. I didn't really mind. It was work that had to be done, but Vince, he was mad about it. And so the final day of the season, it started to snow that day. It was early September, and it was snowing on us, and it was cold, and it was muddy as hell. We're all wet and muddy. So we went way up into the black off the line and started this little campfire in a little gully, and kind of got in there, and we're all just laying low. Like, there's no firefighting to be done today. They're going to send us home tomorrow. Like, season's over. Let's not work too hard, right? So we're all sitting down there, and then Vince is still standing up, old Vince, and he goes, and then we all took off our orange helmets and got down into the underbrush, and we seen those 3 initial attack guys way down there. And Timmy got up and he did his best moose call, and there's moose tracks all over the place, and it's September, right? So, and these IA guys, you could tell, we knew that they're city kids that became firefighters, and they're good firefighters, but they're not in their natural environment the same way still that we are, you know? And so Timmy gives out this moose call, and you see the 3 of them at the bottom of the hill. They're like, back to back to back, and looking around, and we just, and then eventually they bugged out, let's just get out of here. Came to check on us, we'll fucking scare them off. A little moose call. So yes, we were using the hot spot to stay warm at that point, right? And built a little fire on top of the hot spot. So yeah, your aerial, surface, and ground fuels. So what I want to talk about too, this is really, really important. This is one of the main things that people have to understand. And it regards that fire triangle, your heat. I said, well, you can't really add or subtract heat. Well, nature does that for you, right? So we have this thing called, I don't know, does anyone know what crossover means? Excellent. I'm the weatherman, so I'd love to tell you. So crossover is, imagine you have two different things you're watching. A, the temperature of the day, and B, the relative humidity. So what the relative humidity will do is if the relative humidity is 100%, and there's dew on the ground, things like that, it's going to be very hard for fire to wake up and go for a run. You might have a hot spot down there, and it's just... So what's going to happen is as the day heats up, your humidity levels may change. So if it's very, very dry, say in Kamloops, you might only have 10% humidity in the air, which is extremely explosive for fire. But how it becomes explosive is when there's this crossover, and that's when the temperature and the humidity cross each other over. And by that I mean, say your humidity is 45% and your temperature is 25%, or 25 degrees, right? Well, now it's 2 in the afternoon and the humidity's gone down to 30% and your temperature's climbed up to 30 degrees. Now you are at crossover, right? Temperature goes up to 34, humidity goes down to 18, now you've gone into crossover. So when that crossover happens, and I've seen this myself, you have like a dead forest, and at 2 in the afternoon, the sun comes out and gets on it, and in 10 minutes, smoke coming out of places you were walked through 8 times and didn't see anything, right? So that crossover, it's really important to know about it because A, you'll be prepared for it, and be ready, like I can tell it's gonna get hotter now soon. B, it'll give you a good idea of what your fire conditions are, but C, if it's gonna go on an explosive, deadly run, and like those massive crown fires you see, that's when it's gonna take its run, right? And that's when you don't wanna be in the way of it, because there's just no fight in that, no point. So I was talking about trying to burn this, right? But if you separate the pages out, each page will burn really individually quite easily, right? So you look at a stand of forest and you have a bunch of big trees like this, and my experience in those stands are, the fire doesn't go for a run. It lives in the ground mostly, it's burning at the roots. If it burns the roots long enough, maybe a tree will fall down, and maybe the fire will get up inside it. I've seen that, we call it cigars, when the inside of the tree is burning. It's laying on the ground. You can look right in. Well, I got a picture of one. It's like 15 feet in. It was like all red. It looked like the entrance to hell or something. It was cool. So when you have a forest, like I was saying, of juvenile trees, your surface area is so much smaller, right? It allows it to burn so much easier. So if you put all these popsicle sticks together, it's going to be hard to burn. Separate them, easy to burn. So that's your surface area. If it's 6 meters squared, you can divide that. I don't know if you can see this, but you have this big cube here and it represents 6 meters squared. But then they divided it into, what do we have here, 16 different sections. And each of those sections now, when separated, equals 18 meters squared. So you have now a jump of 12 meters squared worth of fuel availability, right? So that's why I'm saying those regen stands, the smaller forests, those are the ones that really go for a run. There's just so much available for it, right? So yes, extreme fire weather, that's the 30-30. That's the one you want to, the black cross, some call it. It's the crossover, and there's a graph here, which I could find one on the computer easy enough for you. But you see here in this top one, the temperature's gone down, and the heat's come up, the humidity's come, what do we got here? So temperature and relative humidity, and you see how they crossed over, and that's the time of day. It says between 12 and 2,000 hours. Yeah. So, afternoon, right? You're gonna get to and that's why it's really important when you get to a fire scene in the morning to get as much done as you can, because you may have to get pulled out from wind. Once wind comes, got to get out of the forest. The wind will fuel the fire and it will also knock trees down on you, right? So you get there in the morning, it's nice and cool, it's calm, there's not much happening. Get as much work as you can get done at that point. The red shirts will make you take scheduled breaks. I hate this personally, and a lot of my crews have, because we get into a flow we want to go, right? For me, if I sit down for 45 minutes and eat, the second half of my day is almost shot. I mean, I only ate half my sandwich. I'll eat the other half on the way home, right? I don't want to. I didn't have time to eat, but also I don't want to stand here being like all the blood going in my stomach. So I prefer to eat light through the day, fruit or whatever, just a couple bites, keep moving, keep active, and at the end of the day, fill up, charge hard, sleep good. That's me personally. A lot of people say you should get up and you should feed yourself as much as you can, but at the same time, I've been on fires where I wasn't sure if we were going to be out that night, if we have to stay right where we are, or if we'd have time to eat again later, or so you make those decisions as you go. So precipitation and wind, those are your big fire hazards, and fuel loading and crossover. Those are the four things that are going to make a fire become very dangerous. There's all kinds of things on the fire weather index system, but we'll skip over that, and we'll go straight to fire behavior predictions. Types of fires. So you have a ground fire, surface fire, crown fire intermittent, and crown fire. Those are your four kinds of fires, right? So you can think of them in classes. There's 6 classes of fire. The first class is it's on the ground. You might see some smoke under the duff. You might see examples of fire behavior on the ground. Type 2 is when it's sort of second class fire is when it's active. So it's not just, maybe that's what you hit the crossover point of the day and now it's actually moving, it's burning, it's doing things, it's an active fire. So now you have type 2. Well, type 3, your third class fire, is when it's going to start to try to climb up, and you're seeing it taking over smaller vegetation, brush. Your fourth is when it's starting to get up the tree into the crown fire, and your fifth and sixth class fires, which, you know, I hope I don't ever have to personally fight. It would be nice to see from a good distance and make a YouTube video of it or something. But your fifth and sixth class fires, I mean, when you get to a sixth class fire, that's when you're looking at fire tornadoes and all kinds of.
You got extra diapers so you don't shit your pants.
And I mean, those fires can move fast and they can kill you, right? So you want to be always not in front of a moving fire. You want to attack from the flank as much as you can if it's that kind of fire. So hopefully we don't see class 5 and 6. I say every year when people say, I hope we have a dead fire season this year. I said, not me. Like, A, I want the work. I need the money. B, if we are out there working, we're going to be just that much more useless next year when we come into a real fire. So it's good to keep the crews working, right? I know from the last 2 dead seasons, a lot of firefighters said, to hell with it, and didn't come back. So there's a talent loss that happens. You start having dead seasons. But of course, what else happens when you have too many dead fire seasons?
It starts coming back again later.
Yeah, fuel loading, right? So my concern about this year is it's very dry in the interior already. I was down in Kamloops and looking at the ground. I was talking to, I was down in Skeech at Jordan Jewell's house, and his grass, I mean, if it burnt today, it'd go for a run. And it's March, right? So I think it's still March, right?
Yeah.
So definitely I'm concerned for this year that the last 2 years having been very wet, I've observed myself a lot of fuel growth. And it's that stuff that's this tall and now dead that's going to become your real, and that's what happened. You look at 2015 and 16, they weren't very big fire seasons, were they? There was a couple, like I think Shovel Lake was in 2016. That was 16. So there was a lot of fire behavior in the north and in even the Peace Country. There was quite a bit of fire behavior, but largely those were dead seasons, right? And then what happened 2017 and 18?
And 2019, it's
Yes, but again, other side of the mountains. I'm talking about BC specifically. So we had 2 seasons where our crew members started going, why am I doing this? Right, so that is one of the dangers of a dead fire season, but of course that fuel loading, how extremely volatile it could become now after a few years of that growth. So on a side story, so I have this weather group on Facebook I run called Interior Weather and Wilderness Watchers, and I'm the Caribou weather dude, right? So on that, when I first started my group, I think at that time I had 400 members. Now I got over 6,100. a week before that, I think it was July 9th, 2017, I was looking at weather graphs and I said, good Lord, there's a real cold front slamming in next Friday. But as I kept looking at the data, I just couldn't figure out where rain would come from. And I said, this is going to be a dry line of thunderstorms. So I put it out in my Facebook group. I have a bad feeling this Friday is going to be the start of something major. If you live near trees, have your bags packed and ready and be wary. And of course, what happened that afternoon, 200 plus fires started. One line of thunderstorms, right? And you always hear this like, I actually hate the idea of shaming people for having fires and things in the bush. I mean, sure, put your campfire out, but this sort of idea that, because when they say human-caused fires, everyone immediately thinks of some asshole who left their campfire going. And a human-caused fire can be a spark from a train on a track. It can be, it could be a cigarette at the window. It could be a vehicle accident in which sometimes some wildfires have started because a vehicle accident caught the grass and shit on fire, right? So where I was going with all that. Anyways, where was I going with that?
The junior, your Facebook group.
Right. So yeah, thank you. My prediction was correct, and then the next day I had hundreds of people trying to join my group. But these are things like as a wildland firefighter, you're gonna have to think about on the ground with weather, right? And how is it working? What is happening today around me? Topography is another major thing that you're gonna have to think about in a fire zone. So if you think about a slope that's flat, how fast is fire gonna travel? Slow. Yes, when you have a 20-degree slope, it's gonna move at least 2 times faster. Right? 40-degree slope, probably 4 times faster. Get the right wind behind it, maybe even faster. A 35% grade slope, pretty much no machinery is useful. So when you get into areas where the slopes are steep, then you're going to be digging handguards, and it's really fun.
I love gold mining.
Pulaski and yourself till. Then another thing you were going to look at when you come to topography in the mountains, and you're a crew boss, and you're looking at the fire behavior, and you're looking at what's going on. You're taking all the information you've been told from your maps, from your incident commander, from everybody. Now you're looking at your section you're in, and you're trying to decide where we're going to put our effort. Well, you have one slope that's this way and one slope that's this way. Now this one's a south-facing aspect, right? And this one's a north-facing aspect. So which one's going to be the more volatile for fuel or for fire? There's a south-facing aspect on the sun all the time, right? And probably has wind coming at it more often than not. Whereas the north aspect, I mean, you'll see this if you're in Wells in the end of May. The north aspect will still have snow, right? So that tells you a lot about just the kind of conditions you're going to see in your section you're put into, right? So yeah, you want to, during the heat of the day, there's some terrain you just want to stay out of, basically, right? You don't want to be, when you hit crossover time, you don't want to be above the fire, you know, basics, right? So those are the kind of things that your crew boss is going to force you to understand. Another thing that can happen in the mountains is, does anyone know what an inversion is? So an inversion is
Not a movie.
when you have 2 different layers of air, but it's not just 2 different layers, it's a specific setup, and I'll explain. So today, we have 2 different layers of air moving through. In Wells, when I left this morning, it was 10 degrees colder than when I got to Quesnel today, right? But what sometimes happens is these air masses switch, and you expect the colder air to be higher up in the air, but because hot air rises and cold air sinks, there's often times where when you're in the mountains, you'll notice, and I mean, it's really noticeable when it's an extreme cold snap. It's like it's minus 35 in Quesnel and it's minus 28 in Wells. Not a huge spread of difference, but you see some of that inversion pattern happening there, right? And you got to be aware of this too, because that inversion can take place above you, and then you don't necessarily know that now that condition, the condition for fire behavior is right in that area. And I've been in Wells, freezing in the valley, and then taking a quad to the top of a groundhog, and then it was like 15 degrees up there. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that the kind of problems you'll get into. just gonna revisit before we move on. Fire intensity rank. Rank 1, smoldering ground or creeping surface fire. Rank 2, low vigor surface fire. It's doing something. Rank 3, moderately vigorous surface fire. So now it's trying to climb up things. And rank 4, highly vigorous surface fire, torching or passive crown fires. So that maybe that means that a tree candle is up for a couple minutes, but it's not indicative of the entire behavior that's happening. It's one section of trees that's gone up. Whereas when you get to rank 5, that's extremely vigorous surface and active crown fire. So that's when it makes that jump from being, well, we have 10 trees burning over here to, look, a section of forest is burning at the top. And then your rank 6 is, I love the word here, blow up or conflagration, extreme fire behavior, which is some of the stuff that we've seen in 2017 out in the plateau here, right? So if you think it's gonna go for a run, what does your crew do? Get the fuck out. No one needs to be heroes, right? Like you heard in my song, it's just trees. Don't die for them. You know, and even if someone's home's in the way, well, they can rebuild that. So, I mean, no being heroes, right? I think it's going to go for a run, pull out. When I was training with structural firefighters, the question came up because we wear SCBA in a house fire because all these melting plastics and self-contained breathing apparatus, if you don't know what that is, all these melting plastics and things like that are in there, and household chemicals, you breathe that in, you're going to get cancer. Cancer is one of the number 1 killers of firefighters, straight up. So be aware of that. Now, when you're in the forest on steep slopes and it's all organic compounds burning, I mean, you still don't want to be breathing in that smoke. That smoke is unburnt bits of tree and carbon, and you don't want to breathe that in, but I mean, that's the reality. Most people don't wear masks of any kind in the line. You're obviously not going to put a 40-pound SCBA pack on your back and go sweating around. Exactly right. So, I mean, so they said to me, well, what do you do if it gets too smoky? You know, you don't use SCBA. Well, what do you do if it gets too smoky? And I said, we fucking run. I'm out of here. So that's one section. I don't know how long we're going till today. It's already. I have lots of time to talk, so.
Right. We're done at 3:30.
So
it's your presentation, whatever you have.
Let's take another 10-minute break, and then we'll go into fire line organization, things like that, and just what Gary Horley will do too when you're taking his S100 tests. If you're with Gary Horley's fire school, I hope so because he's awesome. He will let you do your tests open book, and there's a really good reason for that, and I agree with his reasoning, and I can tell you from experience. I get to the exam and there's a question I don't know, I could guess, right? But what happens when you guess? You're going to remember the guess. You're not going to remember the right answer. So what he wants you to do is come out of there with the right answers in your head, right? It is, and it worked for me because I could at times remember on the fire line being in the test and opening my book to that page.
Oh yeah, cold tree.